Okay, so let's try that again. Thank you for bearing with us.
The video's coming from the app.
And we're going to give a quick introduction again. You didn't miss very much. I'd like to welcome Adriana from the Hudson Valley Language Justice Collective, and she is here to offer Spanish interpretation. Adriana?
Hello, friends. I'm here to offer with my compa María a Spanish-English simultaneous interpretation. Estoy con mi compa María ofreciendo interpretación del español y el inglés. So now would be the time for you to go on your Zoom and click a little globe at the bottom of your screen, interpretation, and select the language you prefer, for example, English. Ahora es el momento que usted vaya a su menú en Zoom y va a ver un globito. Ahora es el momento de darle clic al globito, interpretación, y escoger su idioma preferido, por ejemplo, el español. Y como última señal para ver si nos oyen, and as a last signal to see if you can hear us, denme un pulgar si me pueden oír ahora mismo. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me right now.
Yes.
Si nos pueden oír ahora mismo, perfecto. Para las personas aquí en el espacio, for the people in this, ¿hay alguien que prefiere el español y el inglés? Is there somebody that prefers Spanish and needs support with English? No, so I'll keep going in English right now. If you see somebody walk in from the community and you know them and they prefer Spanish or need support, please point them to our back table over there. And everybody in Zoom who prefers Spanish, who chose Spanish, can hear my co-interpreter interpreting my words right now. So when it comes to question and answer, please feel free to speak in the language that you prefer, and we'll be here to support. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriana. Well, so here we are. Welcome, everyone. My name is Brian Slack. I am Principal Transportation Planner for the Ulster County Transportation Council, and we've been working with our consultants, Foursquare ITP and Jared Toops, in preparing what we have referred to as a route optimization plan over the course of about the past year and a half. And that's what we're here to present tonight, are some recommendations that our office is providing to Ulster County Area Transit for future route and schedule changes that we hope can be implemented within a relatively short period of time, within 1 to 3 years, over the course of the next 1 to 3 years. Before I go any further, I'd just like to acknowledge some staff in the room. We're really happy to have County Executive Jen Metzger here with us this evening, who is also the chair of Ulster County Transportation Council. Legislator Joe Donaldson, welcome. And Director of Public Transit, Tony Roger. Thank you, Tony. Other staff, we have Chris Seeger, our Senior Transportation Planner from UCTC. Did I miss everyone? Did I get all of the county staff? And of course, Jared Toops from Foursquare ITP. So tonight we're taking yet another step toward UCAT's future. And we're looking at a UCAT that we know has already undergone some pretty tremendous changes. And we want to be cognizant and recognize the upheaval that occurred in September that may have been difficult for some of our riders. And we acknowledge that difficulty that those changes may have caused. And we want to reiterate that we're committed to long-term improvements of Ulster County Area Transit service for our riders and for the public at large. The fact these recent changes occurred right near the end of the route optimization plan was, an unfortunate coincidence, but we're working through that, and I believe it really made aware of some real challenges we had with communication through UCAT and UCTC and Ulster County government, and I really feel that our staff have risen to the occasion and recognizing what some of those deficiencies are, and we're really committed to making improvements. I think we've seen some of those improvements already in scheduling and communication, and this plan to really start from the ground up to provide detailed recommendations that UCAT and Ulster County can utilize to improve service for our riders. I want to reiterate that the changes we're recommending tonight will not go into effect immediately. There will be a period of time that Ulster County government will need to digest and consider, and then begin to communicate how we roll out these potential changes. So it's not like we're going to flip a switch on January 1st or something like that. This will be an iterative process with lots of communication involved. Before we continue, and I give the floor to Jared, I just want to make an acknowledgement to UCAT staff from both the front end of the office all the way to the back end, from the top to the bottom. They've gone through a lot of changes as well, and it's been difficult for everyone, but I do want to acknowledge UCAT's commitment to our riders and to the public and to improving service as well. So we thank you for working with us through this process as well, Tony. With that, we're going to begin with about a 20 to 25-minute presentation where Jared's going to run through what we tried to accomplish here, and then we'll open up the floor to Q&A, and hopefully there won't be too much echoing in the interim. So with that, Jared, I'll give it to you.
Thank you, Brian. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. It's great to be back here in Ulster County and in Kingston. The fall foliage is beautiful. I drove in from Albany yesterday and was just kind of blown away. So for tonight's agenda, we kind of went through introductions already. I'm going to have a few slides just kind of as a project refresh. I know it's been a bit about kind of every step that's gone with this project so far, what our goals were. Then, the last time we were out having public meetings, we had a follow-up survey. We had a lot of proposed routes out, and we wanted to get people's opinions of what they liked or didn't like. So I'll provide some sort of brief, kind of high-level overview of what we heard and what of that feedback, how we responded to it. Then before getting into the nitty-gritty route information, I want to hit some of those implementation considerations that Brian alluded to of it's not just flipping a switch, even with, all the money in the world. There's a lot of sort of vetting that has to go through from a route on paper to a route on the street. With those kind of higher level elements and taken care of, we'll go route by route with the updated network. I'll try not to spend too much time on any one route. I'd rather have sort of more organic dialogue at the end. Then we'll talk about some next steps before opening the floor for Q&A. So our project refresh. What are the goals of the route optimization plan? We identified 4. The first being we wanted to increase ridership on UCAT and increase what we call the transit mode share in Ulster County. That's the percentage of people who want to take public transit for any given trip, whether it's for work or some other trip, shopping, doctor's appointment, etc. We want to develop recommendations that are adaptable to an electric fleet transition. UCAT, like a lot of other agencies, are exploring, alternative fuel types for their vehicles. And much like it sounds like it should be as simple as let's just use an electric bus, there are a lot of other considerations before you just swap out one bus for another. So we want to be mindful that the routes proposed can, meet that need. We want to embrace by looking at new micromobility models like microtransit in Ulster County to see if those were the right fit. I'll talk a bit more about sort of where microtransit's going near the end of the presentation. And then finally, we want to adopt a new technology platform. UCAT has several technology like softwares that they use to do scheduling and dispatching and tracking ridership. We sort of had a parallel effort here to identify what those technology needs were to help UCAT as they look for new procurement opportunities, adopt a platform that can kind of grow with the new network opportunity to have an integrated program. Overall timeline, we're right here near the end, kind of in our last phase of public engagement, right? So we were out here early in the beginning talking about the transit need we saw in Ulster County and what was working, what wasn't. We were out here last year, to get a sense. We had some proposed routes a little bit higher level, get a sense of what people liked, what they didn't like. We took that feedback. We got a little bit more into the details on what's going to be required for implementing these changes. And now we're here at the end of our little timeline. So after we had our public meetings, not quite a year ago, we had that survey I mentioned where it went route by route. And we wanted to get people's feedback, wanted to hear what you liked, what you didn't like. So when we were last meeting with the public, we had two scenarios. And the big thing with these scenarios is instead of trying to draw a route serving Kingston two unique ways, the geography of Ulster County really didn't lend itself to, if there's a long highway, the long highway connecting Saugerties to Kingston, you're going to put a bus on that highway. You can't really reinvent the wheel too many times, right? So for our scenarios, instead, we looked at how that service was delivered across time as opposed to across space. So for most of the routes in scenario A, that's closer to what UCAT operates today, of kind of consistent all-day service. Versus scenario B, we explored, would people prefer more service in what you consider your traditional rush hour, like 6 a.m. to 9 a.m., 3 to 7? But the trade-off is to keep things relatively cost neutral between the two, less service in that midday period, or the bus service ends a little earlier in the evening. So we presented those two scenarios to kind of see what people would prefer. Something consistent all day, or are we willing to take that better rush hour service at the expense of other times of day? For each of these routes, we asked the following questions. One, we just wanted to sort of take the temperature. What do you think of the route overall? We also asked if people preferred scenario A or scenario B. And then finally, we had sort of an open comment period where people could drop specific map pins, if you will, along the alignment to flag things they like or flag things that they think the route was lacking. So I have here a brief kind of slide showing a lot of the results for all the routes that we presented. In this first column on the average rating, people could have like a little slider. And if they move the slider all the way to the left to say, I don't like it, that gave it a score of 0. If they moved it all the way to the right to say they love it, it was a score of 100. So we could take all those results, convert them to a number, and get an average score. You'll see here for all of these routes, all of them scored 50 or higher. Route 2 was barely, but most of them were getting into like the high 50s, early 60s, up into Route 10 was nearly 83. So what our big takeaway here was, in general, in terms of the route alignment, the overall concept behind the route, more people liked it than not. So that was sort of our first, like, okay, while we probably could have served more areas, the routes that we have are generally meeting needs. People are liking where they're going. We then asked if they preferred scenario A, scenario B, or if they were kind of ambivalent, they would take either, right? So that's what we're seeing in these middle 3 columns. If you add up the preference with scenario A or scenario B, you can add the either scenario to either of those options, right? And the overall consensus we got is most people preferred scenario A. That's more similar to what's operating now, just consistent all-day service. The bus comes every hour, every 2 hours throughout the day. There's no rush hour peak. Most people preferred that, or were kind of, would take either option. So with that in mind, we really kind of leaned into the service design we had gone for scenario A, since that seemed to meet most people's needs. Then finally, I mentioned people could drop some map comments with specific observations, things they liked, things they didn't. Some routes, we only got 1 or 2 comments. Others, we got up to 10. So we did read all of those and see, okay, what's a need that we could possibly address? What's something that's a hard limit? We did read them all. I want to emphasize that. So yeah, this is just like a quick summary of like the main takeaways we took from the last public survey. Is again, all those routes scored 50 or higher, overall indicating that more people liked them than not. Most residents preferred scenario A or would take either scenario. We did hear, I think the most common theme of comments that we couldn't address was the request for more destinations. We've heard that before. I know we heard, requests going across the Rhinecliff Bridge to Rhinebeck for the Amtrak station. I believe we heard Margaretville out further west of the county. We have heard those before. They just provide unique challenges of those are very long routes that pose a lot of operational challenges. And also what we heard earlier in the project about people want to see more destinations served versus more coverage or frequency on the destinations already served. The general consensus was strengthening kind of the network UCAT already has, as opposed to trying to expand out and serve a lot of new geographies. We felt general, that was a better use of any sort of resource improvement, strengthening what's already operated. So, sort of the last general section before we go into kind of route by route recommendations are just challenges and considerations for implementation. So the first thing we want to talk about is transit nodes. The plan has gone through and we've tried to identify what we're calling a transit node, which is just where multiple routes intersect, typically at some sort of major destination. Some of the nodes we've identified that UCAT already serves include SUNY Ulster, SUNY New Paltz, as well as Ulster County Development Court, DSS, which is where a lot of those routes were shifted to in September. We also want to acknowledge there will be some sort of node in Uptown Kingston. The final location is still kind of being, I think, looked at more critically. For the context of this project, we're using Academy Green as kind of our stand-in for a Uptown Kingston node, if you will. Obviously, like sort of what Brian alluded to, pulling out of Kingston Plaza as sort of the main transfer pulse point, like the old system used to do, did cause some disruption, and we fully acknowledge that. And we also acknowledge that Kingston Plaza still does deserve UCAT service. There's still lots of shopping opportunities, employment opportunities that people need to get here. So I think what this plan is doing, that's building on the service changes that were implemented in September, is that we're serving Kingston Plaza, but we're not relying on the plaza as where we're trying to have people sort of loiter for transfers, right? That's where we want to focus on these nodes of if you're trying to catch a different bus, there are multiple opportunities and not just sort of one transfer point in the entire system. One thing that we've been doing since we last had these open houses is a lot of sort of runtime and scheduling consideration and field testing. UCAT, for some of the routes that were more unique and different from what's on the road today, UCAT actually got an operator in a bus and did sort of a field test to make sure that our rough assumptions about how long the route would take to get from the start to the end were valid. This is also a good opportunity to see if there were any sort of tricky turns or some other challenge with the built environment that might need us to look at the routes more critically. Using those runtime estimates, we started getting into a preliminary scheduling exercise to see, all right, if the bus left at this time, when would they get here? How many back and forth trips could we meet within one operatorship? Considerations like that. We took that opportunity to do a bit more detail about driver schedules and lunch breaks as well, making sure people understand, drivers need a break, they have to eat, and seeing how that actually sort of plays out in the service that's available to the public. So a lot of the changes to the recommendations that you'll see where they're different from the previous round of public engagement are a response to these sort of challenges and considerations. All right, additional things to talk about. These recommendations still represent an increase in UCAT's total operating revenue hours, or how many hours are open for public service, by about 27%. That's a big jump for a transit agency. That's like a very aggressive sort of budget cap that we have. So with that in mind, going back to what Brian talked about, this is not an immediate short-term study. The final recommendations, it's going to take time to build up any additional operator needs, secure additional funding, these additional resources. So this is something that will be built slowly in phases over time. It's not a service that UCAT could just start operating tomorrow if they felt like it. Because it's longer term, we don't want to lock in UCAT by saying, this is exactly the route, don't change it. As implementation comes close, UCAT can look at changes in Ulster County if new developments have opened up or if traffic's gotten worse, and make sort of those surgical modifications to the recommendations as needed. So that's really what that last point is talking about, is while this is about as far as this project is taking these routes, there is still opportunity for UCAT to listen to the public, to see what's happening on the street, and make these sort of fine-tuned adjustments closer to implementation. One other thing I want to talk about is some parallel efforts that we were doing with this study that are going to assist UCAT in implementation. First, we had a task that we called Service Launch and Optimization. This was a tech memo that our team prepared that's now available on Participate Ulster. And this was a document that really outlines sort of industry best practices in two key areas: marketing, education, and public communications, and then service monitoring and performance evaluation, as we look at how a route is doing, where the riders are getting on and off, having dedicated metrics for saying the route's doing well, the route needs adjustments. This memo was kind of outlining a lot of industry best practices for UCAT and UCTC and Ulster County government to develop their own sort of unique Ulster County marketing education plan, what have you. It was designed to be a toolkit of, if you want to make service change X to market that and educate the public, you could consider options 1, 2, or 3. So it sets up a lot of that framework for UCAT to develop its own sort of policy and standard operating procedure. The other major memo to talk about is Task 7, the System Technology Analysis and Recommendation. This document conducted an inventory of UCAT's current technology platforms and tools they use for scheduling, for dispatching, for tracking ridership and other data, and analyzed kind of the strengths and weaknesses of UCAT's current approach, and also did sort of an audit of a lot of major industry players and software packages available. And the ultimate goal of this tech memo was to give UCAT and UCTC the information they need for future procurement, to identify a future software as a service that can kind of meet all of those needs as one holistic program, from the regular bus routes to dispatching, demand response and paratransit, having sort of a one-stop shop, excuse me. And both of these documents are available on Participate Ulster. All right, and now we're at the point that you've all been waiting for. We're here to talk about the updated routes. So this section is going to go route by route overview of the updated proposal. It's going to include an overall description of the route with a map. Not every stop is labeled. We just label kind of major, what we call time points of where you want to make sure you're hitting your schedule. We identified any major changes we've made since we were out here last time. And we have, and I want to emphasize, a draft weekday schedule. We did these schedules, one, to get a better sense of the actual staffing needs of, yeah, we could say the bus runs X hours a day, but how many operators is that going to require? When is their lunch break going to occur? We wanted to have a better sense of those limitations. And they also just kind of help clarify, when we say 60-minute service, okay, that's one thing to hear. What does that actually mean? Okay, the bus could hypothetically come at 3 o'clock, then again at 4 o'clock, so on and so forth. So these are not intended to be absolutely final. This is the schedule that UCAT will adopt in, the 1 to 3 year time frame. They're supposed to provide a more than an approximation, I suppose, of what this service could look like, just to help people better understand the connections being offered. We have here, and I will say a lot of these graphics that we're about to flip through, we do have these on the boards spread throughout the room. We have our network overview, where we have on the left sort of a zoomed out Ulster County map. And then on the right, we zoomed in to look at sort of the greater Kingston area. And these diagrammatic maps are just designed to show the overall coverage and kind of those nodes I talked about. So we still have the plaza identified as one for now, just to help people sort of orient themselves based off the system they know. But these other nodes I talked about, Academy Green, Garrigan Drive, Development Court, SUNY Ulster, SUNY New Paltz, and the Poughkeepsie train station. Big thing to note with these maps is that they're diagrammatic, so they may be simplifying a couple of the more complex or very small turns for the sake of legibility, and that we did not go in and label the stops, again, just for overall legibility. All right, Route 1, the Northern Loop. This is an expanded version of the existing mall route, connecting a lot of those major commercial areas off of Ulster Avenue and Albany Avenue with a couple of the major multifamily residential communities in kind of the north part of Kingston, including Ulster Gardens and Colonial Gardens. This route would operate in a loop and would also sort of start in the trip at Development Court for the transfer opportunities. This would operate on weekdays. Actually wasn't, this is a new service. We had originally proposed serving kind of that northern commercial area around the mall via a couple of other routes, routes 4 and 6. But when we did some of those runtime testing, we found that that was just trying to do too much with one bus on one route. So we decided to kind of split it into a more slightly more comprehensive version of the mall route. And then I'm not going to spend too much time on these timetables, but we do have in the slide deck a draft timetable for each of these routes. Just again, help people kind of contextualize what this would look like. Route 2, the Kingston Local. This is the route that we've kind of designated as the city's sort of local main route. It connects a lot of the denser areas in uptown Kingston and downtown Kingston that are off of Broadway with the Broadway corridor and several major points of interest along Broadway. This would operate 6 days a week. Frequency would be hourly on weekdays and every 2 hours on Saturdays. And the weekday span would be roughly 6 a.m. to 9:30 p.m. Saturday service also starting at 6 in the morning, ending around 8:30. The primary changes from when we showed this route last is originally we had it after passing Academy Green, going up Albany Avenue, heading north before coming down Foxhall to cover more of those residential areas. We realized that with the train tracks that pass through the city and for a route that's this frequent and has to make this many stops, that's just kind of asking for throwing the schedule kind of out of whack, right? So we decided to straighten it out a little bit on Broadway and kind of that core part of Broadway between Academy Green and O'Reilly Street. We also modified this route after it serves the hospital to go directly to the SUNY Ulster Kingston campus, just to provide a little better connection. Also want to note here is that UCTC is also investigating resources for Sunday service in Kingston. So that's happening with the current service that they're looking into, but if those resources were attained for Sunday service on the current network, that would be carried through, and this route would also be intended to be 7 days a week.
For Sunday, would it be the Saturday service for Sunday as well?
That would be, I imagine, yes. And we have the timetable. I won't spend too much time loitering that for weekdays right now. Route 3 is connecting, we call Kingston SUNY. And this connects Kingston with SUNY Ulster on one side and SUNY New Paltz on the other. This is operating 6 days a week with a bus coming every 2 hours, operating until midnight on weekdays and 10 p.m. on Saturdays. And there were no major changes on this route since phase 2. We pulled it to Academy Green as part of that, acknowledging that we're trying to have less transfers in Kingston Plaza, but that was just a very minor shift, a couple of blocks compared to the overall alignment. Route 4, this is really the successor to the KS-SK bus to Saugerties. So this connects a lot of northern Ulster County to Kingston along US 9W. This would also operate 6 days a week with roughly hourly service, running from 5 a.m. to midnight and 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. on Saturdays. Some changes from phase 2. Last time we were out here, we had proposed serving Mount Marion and Tower Drive kind of in the middle of the route, using that bridge that crosses the creek. We thought about it a bit more, and there were just concerns about that, putting a bus on that bridge in winter and just like, I don't know, feeling less confident the bus could take that regularly. So we actually returned to what the KS bus does right now, of after it serves a lot of those main destinations in Saugerties, it turns south and hits Tower Drive at the end of the routes. This route also was one we had previously suggested deviating to serve some of those commercial destinations on Albany Avenue and Ulster Avenue. But with the new Route 1 I mentioned, this one we could straighten out a bit more. This is also, we're not treating Tech City as kind of a transfer point anymore. So this route would deviate to Tech City on request, but that's no longer necessarily the same need, because the other mall loop, the northern loop as we called it, you would catch that bus at DSS or Development Court. Route 6, this is connecting Woodstock to Kingston. So this is going from Woodstock through the plaza in uptown Kingston before going all the way to Development Court. This would run on weekdays with roughly hourly service from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. And the main change here is this is the route we had originally proposed, continuing past Development Court and doing a lot of sort of that mall loop service. Then we just realized that's a little gnarly to try and fit all that with one bus within a very strict timetable. So we made the choice to kind of split it into 2 routes. Route 7, this is our sort of Bel Air, Phoenicia, Kingston, Port Ewan. Say that 5 times fast. So the core of this route will go from Phoenicia to Uptown Kingston, so roughly Academy Green for this project, on every trip. Then every other trip would do one of 2 extensions. What we're calling the 7A would continue west past Phoenicia to serve Pine Hill and Bel Air. Or the 7B, what we're calling it, would continue down Broadway and go to Birches and Port Ewan. This route would operate 6 out of 7 days a week. It would be roughly every 3 hours on the 7A and 7B. And what that would mean is on average, you would see a bus every hour and a half kind of on that core component between Phoenicia and Uptown Kingston. And this is a route that really, this is what we proposed the last go around. This is pretty unchanged. So you can kind of see here in this draft timetable what that looks like of the core of the system, all of these stops between Phoenicia and Academy Green. Every bus is hitting that. The very far north and south ends are seeing every other bus. Route 8, this is our Ellenville to SUNY Ulster route, which, yeah, sort of matches a lot of the changes that we saw in the EU route earlier this year. This would operate 6 days a week, roughly bus every 90 minutes, running from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. And this is a route that we didn't make any major changes in. The EU UE route is one of UCAT's more productive, highly used routes. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Route 9, this is connecting SUNY Ulster to Poughkeepsie. It's also on that journey, connecting Rosendale and circulating through the heart of New Paltz. This would operate weekdays, roughly every 150 minutes. That's every 2.5 hours from 6 a.m. to midnight. This is not very different from what we proposed last time we were out here for engagement. This was really trying to meet a lot of east-west demand we saw kind of in the southern central portion of the county for getting people to Poughkeepsie without always having to go up to Kingston. Excuse me. Route 10, this is really the successor to the current KPL route, connecting Kingston and Poughkeepsie via the Broadway corridor and Birches, Port Ewan as well. Oh, pop-ups, sorry. This is the one route that we currently have slated to operate 7 days a week, just like the current Kingston-Poughkeepsie link, with hourly service on weekdays and roughly every 2 hours on weekends. Weekday span would go until midnight, the weekend span roughly 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And again, this is pretty similar to what we showed when we were out here last. Then the last route is the New Paltz Newburgh. This is pretty much the successor, excuse me, to the X route, connecting SUNY New Paltz to Newburgh via Plattkill and Gardner. This would operate on weekdays every 150 minutes. Again, that's roughly every 2.5 hours from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. This is another route that we didn't hear too much from the public, so we didn't make any major changes. So some other things we wanted to sort of tack on now that we've gone through all of the proposed routes. We wanted to talk about service in New Paltz. I know up until recently there was the New Paltz Loop, and that's without sort of a dedicated service, we wanted to make sure that we understood how service was operating in New Paltz. We have 3 different routes that are all kind of making this circulation pattern more or less around the university. Route 3 would provide that northern connection if you need to get up to Kingston. Route 9 would connect you in both directions, either west heading towards SUNY Ulster or east to Poughkeepsie. And then Route 11 takes you through from New Paltz to points south in Ulster County all the way to Newburgh. And we would have this design to where all of the routes would make the same counterclockwise circulation through kind of the core of Newburgh. So if you're just trying to make sort of a shorter trip within the city of Newburgh, you just catch whichever bus is comes first, and most of them will kind of take you on that key circulation, if you will. When we look at those tentative schedules and map them out, what that comes up to is roughly 2 to 3 buses in Newburgh. I'm sorry, not Newburgh, New Paltz. Thank you. Roughly 2 to 3 buses making that circulation around New Paltz per hour. Varies a little bit on the time of day because some of them have different frequencies, but roughly 2 to 3. So I mentioned at the start, what about microtransit? When we originally looked at microtransit for this study, it was how basically we didn't find a great opportunity for a fixed route service that should go away and be converted to microtransit. We really want to keep, I think, all of the main corridors and areas served with fixed route. So instead, UCAT and UCT submitted a separate application for a NISDOT grant, New York State Department of Transportation, to do some pilots and microtransit zones in Ellenville, New Paltz, and Kingston. And what we want to be really mindful of with these zones is we want them to complement the fixed route network. We don't want them to cannibalize. We want to make sure if the microtransit in Kingston is implemented or piloted, that people aren't trying to take that instead of waiting for the local bus. We're using it to complement maybe when the local bus stops running or for certain trips that are just too far away.
Jared, could you just provide a brief explanation of what microtransit is?
Yeah, microtransit is typically smaller vehicles, like typically what they call even small like vans, like Ford vans. It's often nearly instantaneous booking. It's not like demand response where you typically have to call ahead within at least 24 hours in advance. Microtransit's often used via a phone app of I need to get to point A to point B. Not too different from how people use Uber or Lyft. It's been very successful in certain rural areas of where you have a need for transit, but not the density to kind of support a regular fixed route bus.
Jared, we have one question on this. What about microtransit for Port Ewan to eventually have more riders?
Port Ewan, we did not explore, and I don't believe that was included in the grant, but Port Ewan does have in this system proposal 2 different routes that are connecting it to the core of Kingston, the 10 and the 7. So between those 2 routes, I don't think I'd have to check my math. It's not quite hourly service getting you through the kind of to the heart of Kingston, but it's not too far off. Then just some other UCAT services that just because we didn't talk about them, we want to say that, like, we're not proposing they go away, if you will. This plan really focused on what we call fixed route service of the buses that make the same pattern several times a day on a regular schedule. So that's what this plan is primarily focused on. Other services that aren't really impacted, so would continue as is. UCAT's demand response or paratransit dial ride services, as well as the weekday shopper bus or rural bus, as well as the nature bus. We all assumed those would kind of maintain as is. So what comes next? As we've stated, these aren't short-term recommendations or immediately implementable. They require a significant increase in UCAT's operating resources. We've calculated that sort of the weekday vehicles at maximum service. So at the busiest time of day, how many buses are out on the road? With the existing system, it's about 11 in the fixed route network. With these recommendations, it goes up to 16. That's a pretty robust increase. Daily weekday revenue hours, which is basically how many driver hours you're paying for with open door service, goes from 169 to 214. And I chose those numbers explicitly because they show that daily amount is increasing by 27%, which is the same number we have for the overall annual increase as well. So like I said, what that means is that it's not super short-term, immediately implementable. There's some growing that UCAT has to do to support this network. And this is the last opportunity to provide input as part of this project. We'll take the feedback that we collect over the next 30 days and we'll document it so that when implementation comes, as the resources are freed up, we can look at those UCAT can look at those final comments and use those for sort of any last minute tweaks and final adjustments before proposing an actual service change. We have an open-ended comment form that's available for operator and public feedback. Compared to the last survey, this is a pretty simple form. It's just going to ask you to click the route that you're interested in leaving a comment on and write out your comment. We didn't want to lead the question, if you will. We just want to kind of get the open-ended public opinion. And then the public comment period will be open for 30 days from today through December 7th, 2025, which is the Sunday, first Sunday of December. Yeah, end of the first full week of December. Excuse me. And that's all I have on slides. So yeah, Brian, any?
Just a note before we start getting into discussion. The comment form is up. Everything's available through Participate Ulster. If you found us already tonight, I'm hoping you had already seen the Participate Ulster page. But that form can be accessed right at the top, and we'll make sure it's prominent in the by tomorrow. But you should be able to find it already. And my email address is up there as well, bsla@ulstercountyny.gov. You can always submit comments directly to me. Before we start getting into discussion, Jared, I think because we did experience that echo,
Yeah.
it might make sense for you to log off. And that might eliminate our echo as we open up. I know we'll lose access to the PowerPoint presentation, but I think we can probably deal with that.
Yeah, no problem.
Rather, a lot easier than we can that horrendous echo. Before we get into our Q&A, I just want to welcome our Director of Planning and Ulster County Transportation Council, Dennis Doyle, has joined us. And our Deputy County Executive, Amanda Laval, is here in the room. And Matthew Nussbaum, one of our great communication directors. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so the first question we had here in the room was just asking me to speak a bit more about the marketing and communications recommendations that I alluded to at the start of the presentation. Yeah, so what this memo does is it identifies a lot of best practices that just my colleagues who are specialists in outreach have observed with other transit systems, whether it's, having a public hearing, whether it's, having travel ambassadors on the buses, going on the radio, doing like print collateral, and it identifies like a lot of strengths and weaknesses without that. This is really good if you're trying to target existing riders, but if you're maybe trying to advertise new service, they're not going to be on buses seeing flyers, right? That's a very simplified example, but it goes through and identifies sort of who your key audience is for these different types of outreach, when it's appropriate and when it might not be appropriate. It does that sort of big inventory of, I want to say, at least a dozen strategies, maybe closer to 20, and then kind of sets up a framework for how UCAT or Ulster County, whoever is going to be leading the charge on that, would develop their own standard operating procedures. So I think we provided kind of a sample decision tree of, is this a major service change that involves a street losing service, or is this something super minor like the service ending slightly earlier in the evening? What is major or minor? That's up to UCAT to define, but saying if it's a major one, you should do X, Y, and Z. If it's a minor one, you should do X, Y, and Z. And then like that should be done at least 30 days in advance of the announcement, or that should be done 30 days before the actual implementation. So it's just, I think, trying to help set like a strict guidance for if we're doing X, it's already listed out X, Y, and Z. So it's not, oh, should we maybe do a poster this time? It's trying to help define a standard operating procedure so that you know what to expect for any various kind of service change or service delay.
And I'm wondering, Amanda, would you mind providing a brief overview of some of the near-term changes and improvements that we can expect on the Ulster County Area Transit webpage? I know we're working on those, and also our schedules.
So, and if there's any, if I forget anything, Matt, please remind me also. So we're looking at, both near term and kind of longer term improvements, right? So the first thing is schedules that are, we've changed the front of the schedule recently. I don't know if folks have maybe seen those, where they have kind of a slightly different header, so the information is hopefully clearer. And also whether or not it's weekday or weekend service. but we will be working on improving the maps and the schedules themselves, just to make them more readable and easier to digest. It took me kind of a while to learn how to read a UCAT schedule. I feel pretty comfortable with it now, but we want anybody to just be able to pick it up and see that all the information they need from the schedule. Same thing for the website. Right now, we're in the middle of both a technological software assessment, but also just thinking about how to integrate the data and how the different software applications talk to each other. But really, the main point of all of that is to get more data that's real time to people who are trying to use the bus system so that you know if a bus is running late or things are updated in kind of a uniform fashion from if there's a change in the schedule that it then reflects in the app, reflects in all the different ways. So I think that's high level. What we're looking at is just a really pretty robust review of the website and the schedules just to make them more user-friendly.
Thank you, Amanda. And then medium term, a lot of some of the recommendations do hinge on adjusting the software packages that UCAT uses that would provide a little more dynamic interaction.
There's a video on the county executive's YouTube page, and it's also linked on social media, county social media pages. It's also on the UCAT page that is going through, that talks about UCAT updates in the near term and medium term, and talks about the RFP and just to set expectations there.
Because of our continued issues with our audio here, I would ask that folks online, if they have questions, please put them in the chat. And our staff will read them back and we'll try to answer them that way, rather than, I was hoping to have faces and voices live, but I don't think we're gonna be able to do that. Are there any questions on the chat?
If you just put one, there's a comment, it says, I'm very saddened that the request that Catskill Neighbors Inc. and the town of Middletown initiated with Tony Rozier almost 2 years ago to bring UCAT over the hill into the town of Middletown is not being considered as a viable solution for a senior population. Death does not drive. I think this is a great mistake. And then one person has responded to saying, especially considering the bus only goes as far as Phoenicia half the time.
Yeah, no, I think I mentioned at the start is those ideas about extending further west. I believe Middletown, that's where Margaretville is. Right? Yes. Definitely a comment that we've heard. Just like I mentioned, is that when we're trying to look at how to improve service, extending it significantly further, especially outside of Ulster County, not only presents operational challenges of if you're going to maintain the bus there, it's going to be even less frequent now because it's going to take time to come back. Also, depending on the county, I know from my work in other parts of upstate New York, there's a lot of liability issues when you cross county boundaries if it's operated by a county government. I don't know if those all apply in the specific Ulster County context, but I know that's a major challenge for other operators throughout the state of it's not as just simple as driving in. It's often a lot of negotiation and a lot of institutional challenges. And I think we just found that even with our resource requirement, it was better to strengthen the network that's here as opposed to, I think, trying to stretch out and cover more areas, particularly outside of county.
We also work very closely with Orange County Transportation Council and Orange County Planning, speaking of Middletown, and the services that are provided out there. So that is open for discussion in the future, how we can better coordinate with Orange County Transit to try to provide those cross-county services, and Dutchess for that matter. Did I see a question from Mr. Erner?
Yeah, how many folks responded?
To what?
You had lists of respondents preferring this or that scenario?
I would have to, while we're answering other questions, I'll have to look at what the raw total was. It wasn't as many people as the original survey. I believe the original survey was like close to 600 respondents. I know it was not as many, which is not surprising. Typically, the more complex or the more questions the survey asks, the lower the response rate gets. I'll pull that up while we're looking at other questions to get that number back to you.
Do you have a follow-up?
I have additional questions not related to that.
Okay, thank you.
I have a few questions, but I'm just gonna ask one of them now, because it's connected to the expansion versus improvement of the existing. You said that it's an increase in UCAT's total operating hours by 27%. Can you talk more about that? And also specifically as well, and that as the overall thing, but also at the last meeting last year, you talked about, so now we're going down to one. We started off with the transit integration of city bus going out of business and UCAT taking it over. We had 3 buses. It started off with 3 buses once UCAT took it over. Eventually it went down to 2 buses. And now this proposes it going down again to 1 bus. When city bus was, when city bus going out of business was being studied, the idea was to have half-hour lead times in Kingston. That didn't happen. So now we've got an hour lead time. This bus that you're talking about for Kingston is every hour. But and I also want to make the clarification that it's not, when you have on here, when you say every hour, it's not really every hour. It's like 2 out of 8 of those times will be every 2 hours, you know, so it's really, it would be better to have the range of what it is, because it's a large enough percentage that those 2 breaks during the day impact the frequency. So it's kind of like, sometimes it's quite a big difference. Sometimes it's 13 trips out of 13 trips a day, but sometimes it's 2 out of 7. So that range would be more realistic in terms of what we really should expect. But in Kingston, so now we're down to 1 bus at 1 bus an hour, but in November you said the other buses could fill in. I'm seeing that most of them are only doing half of Broadway and not the entire length of downtown to uptown and back and forth. The KPL would do that, right? How are you going to fill in to make it at least what we have now? How does it work out? Or are we losing service frequency and buses and things like that?
And let's just make the distinction between 1 bus and 1 route, because we actually have multiple buses
Oh, okay.
running on
Okay,
individual.
oh, sorry.
Yeah, and so for the case of the Kingston local, it does have 2 buses. We estimated that going from a one-way trip on that route would roughly take an hour. So we have 1 bus on each end. So it is.
We told about that aspect, because that's one thing that happened with the transit integration, is that it was just still 1 bus trying to run every half hour.
It was in our estimates for the total operating expenses, it assumes that you have 2 buses on the route at all
Okay.
time, and their lunch breaks, we tried to stagger them out, because the whole lunch break thing can't throw a wrench in the whole, like, having nice hour. We tried to make sure at least, both operators aren't going at the exact same time. So to make sure there's still some level of service happening. The other thing with the Kingston local route, I think a benefit is compared to sort of the blue or yellow or some of the city buses, is that it really tried to streamline service of having, like, not doing different streets in different directions, but really trying to be like a simple route. So even if it's maybe slightly longer wait time, it's a lot more intuitive of a route. Like, it serves that core of Broadway and it's doing the same thing in both directions. So not like doing like one-way loops or things like that. To your point about, sorry, I want to make sure I hit all parts of your question. The other routes, that was mainly in the form of, you have a lot of those routes coming up Broadway. So again, if you're trying to get from Broadway to, like, as far as Academy Green, where we have that node, there are multiple routes coming up from various points in the south, to where if you're just trying to get north to Academy Green or kind of the edge of uptown, you can hop on any of those. And then with the case of the 3 and the 4, those both come into Kingston from various routes. We have the 4 coming from Saugerties going down. I always mix up Foxhall and Flatbush. It's Foxhall coming in. So like providing some local coverage kind of in those other sort of northern parts of Kingston. The big thing we wanted to leverage is that Kingston has a relatively, compared to a lot of parts of Ulster County or just a lot of parts of the country, a really well-developed street grid. So it's not like, I know not every block has a sidewalk, but the block sizes are reasonable compared to other areas, to where even if, it's not hitting every turn or every small street that the blue or yellow does, most of the city is still within walking distance of a few of these major routes. And for those who maybe have impairments or struggle with mobility, there are still the other services, the paratransit, the dial ride that UCAT offers.
only a very small fraction of those people who have mobility issues would qualify for those, though. People have a variety of mobility issues that it's really frustrating. We hear too often the refrain of, well, there's always fair transit. There's not as many people who have, and more people have an issue, and for instance, like the bus will go, the KPL, no, the local bus, for Kingston, it doesn't make it past the overpass, so whoever's gonna be taking it, it'll stop, you can't get past the overpass until you're all the way uptown. So there's that missing, like you have to go down, the overpass is hard to walk, go down and up again. So there really should be a stop over by Cornell Street.
Okay.
And that's also a very important road, Cornell, to go to the post office.
Understanding the limitations that we have, though, when you add more stops,
Right.
it's adding more time to the
But there
route.
should be a minimum level of service that we can expect in the most densely populated place in Ulster County.
And we've added, I believe, we've counted 100 buses per day on at least a portion of Broadway.
Yeah, but it's only a portion, so the logistics of getting from downtown to uptown or downtown to midtown don't actually compute in that. And then the two bus drivers and having different lunch breaks in the schedule, it shows, I looked through every schedule and it shows 2 lunch breaks, breaking the service time on every single schedule.
Yeah, well, what I meant to say was like, we made sure that like, they're not taking lunch at the same time, so it's not like the service completely goes offline. We try to at least stagger their lunch breaks with their shifts.
You can take
So
some other bus.
Hmm?
You mean you can take like some other bus?
there would at least, for the routes that have 2 buses, only one of those buses might be on lunch break, but the other one's not.
But the schedule showed 2 lunch breaks.
Right, but just they wouldn't be, they're not at the same time. Because most of the time when you have 2 buses, like the
No,
first
no,
operator is
there are
starting,
2 breaks in service in the day. For each of the schedules, it has where it bumps another, it skips an hour on each of those proposed schedules.
because there are if it's a longer route that has 2 operators, there's also 2 shifts. So over the course of the day, it's 4 operators who are running that route, all on roughly 8 to 10 hour shifts. So they all are entitled to a lunch break. We just make sure that only one of them is ever on lunch break at a time. That's what I meant to say. And to your where'd he go? Okay, well, I had the number of surveys. It was, okay, I'll hold that.
We do actually have comments building up online, so
Yeah,
let's go through them. First is, I suppose the comments from Christine Tingle says, for those of us that are disabled, it is very difficult to have to change buses to get from Colonial Gardens to Uptown. Gary Houston just wants to clarify, the town of Middletown is in Delaware County, not Orange County. Jacqueline Smith says, I believe I spoke with Amanda on the phone a month ago on the phone when a route changes impacted my daily commute. The bus service sudden changes really impacted my day-to-day commute to work because I now have to pay $20 to $60 a week for Uber rides to work, which has impacted my paycheck every week. I live in Port Huron and I'm about 5 minutes walking distance from Birch's apartments. About 10 or more people who had to walk to the stop have been impacted by the new changes. They're very unhappy, and even some people did not know the buses changed. The 60-minute service interval is perfect for someone like me who only used the bus to go to work. I did give input to the feedback over the phone to Amanda. And she further says, I would like to add to the discussion comment above, KPL has been a nightmare anytime I used it. I also experienced an uncomfortable experience on the bus route, hence I stopped using the bus service because I fear for my safety. Further sounds good. Dean Schindel says, I'm disappointed with the way that the X/11 route is being handled. I brought up that I was able to travel to North Plank Road to shop. The route has been shifted to partially correct issue. But now I have to walk. I have no way to take the bus at all since the route has been shifted to Route 208 on New Paltz, Route 44/55, instead of traveling down Route 32. To get shopping or medical transportation takes calling months in advance, not days. And then there's a comment from Gemma who says she's not able to type easily, but she would like to speak. So I'm going to unmute her briefly. Chat. Gemma, you can speak if you can unmute yourself.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. I'm just curious, because I'm trying to figure out because it's kind of difficult to view all those different schedules, but what is the bus run is there one that primarily goes up and down Broadway and maybe from Broadway to Uptown, like around the Wall Street area? Is there one or are they kind of split up? That's the first question.
There are multiple buses that will go various stretches of Broadway, and the way we have them drawn terminate around like Academy Green, so actually not far from where we're at right now. The route 2 is sort of the local Kingston service of it does that core chunk of Broadway between I think O'Reilly and the circle with Albany Avenue. And then the northern portion, I don't think it goes on Wall Street directly, but I think it hits sort of the southern portion of Uptown. And then serve some of those residential neighborhoods before ending at Stony Ridge apartment complex.
Okay, I was just to let you know, I mean, I take paratransit, but I was just curious to know because I was told that paratransit goes according to the regular bus schedule. That's what I was told. So I guess what I'm saying is that if that's the case, and I know I'm on a regular, I go to Maiden Lane from down, I guess you'd say almost downtown, but almost not down the shim, but before you hit that hill. Go from that area and I go to Maiden Lane. So technically speaking, what schedule am I following? Because lately I've been making appointments and the time is like an hour, 45 minutes before or 45 minutes to pick up after an appointment. And that's only started since this change. So I just don't really know what schedule they're using.
Gemma, I really understand your quandary, but I'd really like to try to keep our focus not on the existing system, but talking about some of these future changes.
But it has changed since it started to kick in. That's what I'm saying. It's been changing since today.
September, right?
Today, for example, I'm getting times that are so far off, like I guess with the new system, things that have been going.
Paratransit depends on the people who make the reservations.
That's
Paratransit
myself.
require the reservations in advance, so it's typically, try to correct me if I'm wrong, it's typically based on how many people have scheduled a requested pickup, and then the dispatchers go through and figure out, okay, we need to connect these people to these destinations, so we're going to hit them in this order, and we roughly estimate the bus will get there. So that's dependent on the day of how many people are requesting the service and where they're trying to go. Paratransit is not fixed route.
Tony, do you have any clarification you may
Okay.
feel that?
We do have an hour window before and after once a paratransit appointment is requested. And with the amount, we did add an extra 2 paratransit buses on recently since the September 15 changes. But we have quite a few people that are using paratransit now. So the window is an hour prior. If you request your appointment, it could be an hour before or after, then you can be picked up. And that just allows us to schedule. Reason.
Okay, so are you picking up more, like, for example, if myself and making up names, Jessica and Joe are going to like the same vicinity, or like on the way you're taking so-and-so here and it's in the path. Are you picking up more than one person? You know what I mean? Like
If they have to, yes, they will pick up more than one person.
okay.
So it really depends on how many people have requested by day. So that you're right, it's not what we call typical. It's how it's different from the routes I've talked about. The routes I've talked about, we call fixed route. They run on a regular schedule. Paratransit responds to the request made. Hence why you're seeing different pickup times, drop-off times, depending on the day.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Thank you, Gemma.
You're welcome.
We do have one more comment online. This is, why is there an X/11 bus going to be not going from 32 towards New Paltz? And it's only going to go up 32 toward Newburgh and down 44/55 to go to Gardner. It messes with people that need to go to New Paltz that live in Medina and that are disabled or have medical issues that can't walk very far. It's bad enough right now that we don't have a bus that goes to New Paltz for people on 32 already, unless you take the Newburgh bus and stay on the bus for over an hour and go through Long Hill to get to New.
The proposed Route 11 New Paltz to Newburgh does run, I'm looking at the map to be sure, does run on 32 and serves Plattkill, Medina, which is Route 32 at 4455. And is it Gardner or Garnier?
Gardner.
Gardner, okay. So that route typically, because it only has one, I believe in the current and the proposed has one bus on it. So if it depends on which direction you're waiting for. You can get on the bus sooner if it's heading in the southbound direction. But to your point, if it's the southbound bus and you want to go north, you're going to have to wait till it finishes its trip in Newburgh and then makes its return trip. But if you waited on the northbound direction, you would catch a bus that takes you to Newburgh more directly. Really depends on, I think, what time of day you're trying to schedule it and also just what side of the street you're on.
Thank you.
That's the last time I thought.
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm gonna kind of come from the other end because we're very rural and my granddaughter 21, who said that while her father was on vacation, she paid $1,200 to get to Marist and to get to work in town of Ulster for 2 weeks. So I'm glad that we're looking at optimization, but I was also hoping for some sort of other expansion. I mean, we've got these roads like Union Center, like I think it's 55 or 52 further south. Floyd Acker Road, I don't know if you go over Mohawk Mountain, even though that was pretty scary being on a UCAT bus going to the hill. But and now if we're looking at, I'm not a big fan of microtransit because I feel like we're putting more vehicles on the road in our urban areas, Kingston, Ellenville, and I can't remember what New Paltz, who already have pretty decent service, or it's very walkable if you can walk. So, yeah, I guess my question is, what about the more rural areas? So we don't have to have vehicles. I prefer at this point not to have to drive anymore. I hate being on the road, and I used to love to drive, but it's pretty scary.
I think for Ellenville, the idea was for microtransit to also serve Walker Valley.
Okay, so go over that ridge. Okay, so that's good. Okay.
The challenge with any transit agency providing services, you have to look at, they're not in the business. It's not like the public transit agencies aren't in the business of making money per se, but the number one sort of predictor of transit ridership is going to be just density. Are you serving areas? So at the beginning of the project, we did a market analysis that looked at like the population density, the density of jobs, as well as other demographic indicators. We looked at the presence of low-income households or households with only one car or 0 cars. And the challenge is that where those totals, if you will, are in a high enough concentration, the Merit Transit Service are typically in the denser towns or along the corridors UCAT already serves. So while obviously rural areas have those populations with those needs, they're so far spread out that it becomes just you're sending a bus out. Like, the problem with like a countywide public transit is it could take hours just for go pick up one person at the very far end of the county. So it's really like a challenge with density of just like the market demand is not there to justify the investment per se. And when you're operating in a limited resource environment, that's a constant question of like, do we want to put more frequency to like build up ridership in the areas we think there's potential, or do we do more coverage? And that was a question we asked in our original survey a year and a half ago, asking people. And it's unfortunate you can't have both without just like throwing ungodly amounts of money at it. And generally what we
frequency.
Yeah, it's most of the time frequency and coverage in a limited resource environment, it's one or the other. And when we asked frequency kind of in the areas that can support it, did win out, especially with existing UCAT riders. So that again went to this point I made of, do we expand to cover more areas, or do we try to strengthen our core? Like, we're working out the gym. This already is additional, like I mentioned, a general 27% increase in like the annual operating hours for fixed route service. That's already a pretty, for any transit agency in a single plan, that's an aggressive benchmark in a good way, but.
So how did the 27%, I don't get how it's 27% more.
Typically it's for several routes. We put 2 buses on it instead of 1. And even just like sort of minor expansions to span it, because revenue hours are but almost basically like if I had some dollar amount of this is how much I pay for bus service an hour. What a lot of transit agencies will do is figure out, in the case of like Washington DC, they estimate that what's it, 120, 130 bucks an hour is pays for the operator's salary, pays for all your maintenance, pays for your gas, basically everything except buying the bus itself. So often when you're trying to just get a general sense of how much service a transit agency is putting out on the road, revenue hours is a pretty good like proxy value, if you will. I see where you're coming from, that like maybe compared to the existing, so there's not anything here that necessarily screams like this is way more. It's very, I think, fringe amounts on a lot of the routes, or I've all just been kind of topped off, for lack of a better term.
Can I ask another question?
I just think we
Oh, yeah.
get turned
Yeah.
opportunity.
I've been trying to be polite, so. My name is Carol Mazone, I live at the Birches in East Elpis, and unfortunately, the ridership in that area is very low. Went from a bus that came every hour to one that comes every 3 hours, which is totally unacceptable. If we wanted to go to the plaza and do some shopping at the grocery store, we'd have to take the bus, do our shopping, and maybe wait 2 to 2.5 hours in maybe 30-degree weather or 95-degree weather for the bus to come. And it's just totally unfair to us.
Well no.
Said, Carol.
So maybe if we could talk about how
And
the plan differs from what's happening.
well, he said there is a plan, and I asked the gentleman how long it would take for the new plan. He said 2 to 3 years, and I said, I could be dead by then also. I mean,
Yeah, and then did you, were you?
How are you?
I know you
chatted.
Yes.
There's the route optimization, we're here, right? The route optimization plans over here, and what is online is we're looking at ways with the resources that we have now to kind of fill some of those gaps, and we've definitely heard from you.
Right.
You've been riding the bus for years.
30 years.
30 years, and that schedule is not meeting the needs there. So we are looking at what we can do in the near term to fill some of those gaps at different times. So we are trying to create something else here. Because, we're here about optimization, but we're working on it.
And the first bus that comes in that I know is 6:55 a.m. We don't need to go anywhere at that time. The next bus is 9:55 and then 12:55 and so forth. It's really hard to try to get around that with this issue.
Yeah, no, thank you for that.
And like I said, the temperatures have a lot to do with it when you're an elderly person. You just can't handle those
Right.
temperatures.
And Jared, could you maybe just touch briefly on proposed service from the Birches and Port Ewan?
Yeah.
Connections in Kingston?
Yeah, so let me. Here we go. So if we go to the system map. Okay, I know that's not the biggest. So we have Birches, Port Ewan, that's roughly here where we have the seven, right?
I'm not sharing the screen.
Oh,
The Zoom lost.
my apologies.
Yeah.
And I realize they're not gonna see me.
And there you go.
Thank you. Okay, so the Birches, Port Ewan sites is. Okay, there's my mouse cursor, right? So that's roughly here, and I realize that there is a slight omission in this map because we did propose the 10 would stop there as well. So we have the 10 and the 7 that would come and deviate to Birches and Port Ewing
In 2 or 3 years.
in anywhere from
Yeah.
So
There's a woman that's an aide that works in my building. She has to come to work 2 hours before her shift begins and is sitting outside in the cold sometimes waiting to start her shift because of the bus timing. I mean, that's unfair. And then there's another aide, a young man, he bought an e-bike, but what is he gonna do when it snows and there's ice on it? I'm not as articulate as others, I'm sorry, but I'm just trying to make my point.
no, it's a fair point, and I know that 2 or 3 years can seem I understand that's a long time frame.
Well, at 78, yes.
It becomes a challenge of, you know, until we find the extra operators or the extra buses needed to do the service expansion. In the short term, if it's not like a quick schedule offset, it becomes whose bus do we take away to push us elsewhere, right? Like any service increase now in a cost neutral scenario means you take away a bus from someone else.
And let's say the maximum implementation, we're saying horizon is 3 years, so we hear you. And we're gonna start working harder to improve that delivery of the service in less than 2 years. We'll do our best.
We do have some additional comments online as well. Eugene Schindel says, I live north of 44/55 and am disabled. Distance to 44/55 from my house is just over a mile. I'm the one my daughter PR was referring to before, which is the previous comment about the X11 bus. Jenna says, oh yeah, have more drivers been hired? What routes would you on the surveys? I'm referring to the comments previously put in the room.
That's going to be one of the challenges for implementation is hiring drivers. We definitely recognize that, and it's one of the reasons why we've had to build out a potential 3-year implementation, in that UCAT has hired, I believe, 4 drivers recently, in addition to what we had just 6 months ago. That's a huge step forward that has improved service locally. What we're proposing are additional hires beyond that. It will take time to find qualified drivers, to train them and to get them in place and working on these routes.
And that's not unique to UCAT. That's an industry-wide challenge, especially with the pandemic, finding qualified drivers and retaining them. Transit agencies all over the country are struggling with that. Like there's a lot of the professional associations are like doing whole research projects for how do we improve like overall conditions, because, you know, one of the common things is they get their CDLs, they work for transit, then they go drive for Amazon. Like, so you have, you know, challenge of trying to convince someone to, you know, work for a transit agency instead of Amazon, who pays well. So yeah, that operator thing is not unique to Ulster County. It's nationwide.
But we will have an implementation plan as part of this overall plan. So we can look at phasing approaches and begin to make some of these changes, and then begin to ratchet up service with additional drivers as they become available.
Right. And I would say just also in this latest, the union contract, you know, there are increases in wages for bus drivers, so that's going through a process, but I think that's gonna help with hiring bus drivers.
The job wasn't even posted year round, so there's some really other basic things that need to be better. It wasn't posted on the county site, the job, it just is posted intermittently, a bus driver.
Once the positions are filled, they come down. And then once we get an open position, it goes back up.
But you've had an open position though this whole time, you've had at least one open.
We did have a completely full. We filled all of the bus driver positions probably about a month ago. Now we do have a couple that will be going up, I would say in the next week or two.
But before
And one change we made was we have part-time positions, which were really hard to fill. So, in the new year, what I proposed in the budget was basically consolidating them into 4 full-time positions, new full-time positions, so it'll be easier to fill those positions.
Is it limited to 4? Because it looks like we need a lot more than 4 more bus drivers.
That's just for this
The
year.
whole year.
Yeah.
That's not very many.
Yeah, it was actually the largest number of positions we added to this budget. That's a whole other conversation, but that's the snap and the.
Because the hiring, like Brian was saying, one of the memos that we need to get wrapped up soon is identifies kind of rough math estimates of, okay, in order to swap out, for example, the blue and yellow route, hypothetically, or let's say, for argument's sake, that you want to implement routes 1 and 2. And routes 1 and 2 come online is when they would replace like the blue and yellow and the mall. And so you look at, on average, how many full-time operators it requires to operate the blue and
Yeah.
those routes versus how many it requires.
A reference.
Yeah, to kind of figure out like, okay, is that relatively operator neutral? Is that, you know, a savings? Is that, because it really depends on which routes you kind of package together.
Jared, stop sharing the screen so we can-
Yeah, sorry.
Just because it's part of it, I want to ask, the electrification, I know that that makes it very hard to get buses that were fully committed to only buying electric vehicles. Do we have an interim plan until we get more electric vehicles? Like, all the buses we buy in the future have to be electric, right?
I think there was an adjustment made to that policy. Amanda, can you speak to the?
Yeah, there were just no small buses.
Right.
Available that were electric, like the cutaway buses, those smaller ones, so we ended up having to, in the near term, just to replace to get these traditional buses, because they didn't exist. So it's not like we're holding anything, like when we have a need for replacing them. But actually now there's actually a new bus company in New York, bus manufacturer in New York that makes those smaller electric ones.
Yeah.
But anyway, we haven't slowed anything down.
Okay, that's good.
If you give your comments online, you read them in reverse order, one that's relevant to what we're talking about now. Jacqueline Smith asked, why not ask the governor to ask the fund Ulster County more money to help UCAT utilize more funding to hire more drivers?
We'll do that.
Yeah.
Well, we should have state buses.
Then she also has another comment that says, a lot of seniors in the Bridges apartment complex cannot access the main road for KPL because of medical conditions or disabilities. It's really a bit unfair for them that a bus service doesn't run hourly anymore. I know from riding the former yellow route before the new change happened, it was very easy to plan out what time to wake up and prepare to wait for the bus versus having to wait and see when a 3-hour bus would arrive and miss things like appointments, work, etc. Not many seniors have smartphones, landlines, computers, or know how to access them.
Yeah, so the KPL replacement, we propose going into Birches and Port Ewan. So that would be hourly service on weekdays. And that's on top of, there's the additional, the 7 bus in the proposed. That's again, yeah, every 3 hours or so. But between the two of those, that's the math comes out to more than 1 bus per hour, not by a lot, but we have the KPL. It would be the KPL, the 10, if you will, going into Birches, Port Ewan. So pretty regular connection, either north to Kingston or south to Highland and Poughkeepsie. And I know you had your hand.
But as I said, 3 hours is just unacceptable
Well, the proposed would be hourly.
for 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
Well, my other thing is, I agree with one of the people online that said she feels unsafe on the KPL bus. There's a lot of young people on there who are rude, disrespectful, and like I said, you feel unsafe, especially if you ride that bus anytime after 3:30 in the afternoon. Totally bad.
I would like to make myself known. That would be me. And I'm actually crying in the background right now because of that experience.
Sorry, I didn't hear it.
That was her.
Someone who had a
her-
similar
she's
bad
wa- she's
experience.
Watching and she's very emotional about it.
Yes.
Yeah, no. I'm sorry to hear that. I don't know. I'll be frank, from a planning perspective, I don't know how I can.
Interview some drivers and see what they put up with.
Yeah, we talked to some of the operators near the start of the project to hear. I mean, it becomes tricky because it's a public bus, so you can't tell certain people not to ride, right? And so it's becomes we can design bus routes that connect major destinations, but you know,
We did hire bus stewards, so we could be bus stewards on that
I
bus.
just one on there, I haven't been on it too much lately.
They go to multiple routes, so we'll make sure that. they don't
I think
stay
it's
on
needed definitely on the KS and the KPL, definitely.
I was kind of looking at the website, your firm's website, like when we started, and I noticed, I was speaking to all of the country bus drivers and employees, that your firm has done some academic research on, I mean, really more robust kind of wellness programs for bus drivers, and I was wondering if any of that was thought of being implemented here, or if there's any recommendations for Something like that.
Not per se, because this was more of this is a service planning project, so we weren't coming in, like, we had some memos that talked about, things UCAT could do to change policy. But in terms of what we were asked to do, we were asked to look at the routes and the schedules, not those other major outlets. So those are totally worth considering. I'm not trying to dismiss that.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, looks great for your firms.
Yeah, no, I have several colleagues who are like really, and I'll totally admit, I'm not one of them, so I can't like speak to all the great work they do personally. I know they do it. But yeah, it just becomes that's a lot of policy changes and other stuff like HR stuff, which is important. But this was a like service planning exercise, again, market demand elements like that, and just outside of what this project was scoped for.
But it's an excellent suggestion,
Mhm.
especially when we want to consider the importance of retention of our drivers who know the routes. It's critical to the success of the organization. And I think it's something, I mean, bear in mind, we're emerging from COVID just 2 years ago. And it put an enormous stress on transit agencies throughout the country. And this study, I think, is recognition of the need to get in a better posture as Ulster County government to provide a better service. So I really am optimistic that it will put us in that position. It's getting close to 1:15. I want to get some last questions in before we.
Sure, there's one online from Garrett Houston says, I'm a little confused, bringing UCAT over the hill into the town of Middletown, would it cost Ulster County any money? Nor would it require any additional buses or drivers. Middletown is ready to pay their share of the associated revenue mile costs. This extension would clearly increase ridership for appointments at the Margaretville Hospital alone. As UCAT is a long-established transit system, all we are looking for is a sit-down to figure out a plan to extend the current service or how we would go about providing our own service that could link up with UCAT and Pine Hill. How do we get a sit-down?
Amanda?
Is that an opportunity for us to look at other help, Delaware County maybe look at, I don't know if they're eligible for 5310, so for different types of funding for senior medical transportation. Maybe we can talk to them about what.
And they do have transit service in Delaware County, correct?
Yeah, they have some, so we can say. There's small buses there.
So, sir, you can contact me, Brian Slack, and we'll talk more.
And RUDA, Riders in Ulster Transit Alliance.
Laura.
So, still harping on the expansion, but this may be a you or a Dennis question, if we did, get together with other municipalities and speak with them. Is the Thrive money still out there for economic development? Because it looked like that was business and transportation. So I'm thinking like loop buses within your transportation system, and this is outside of the optimization plan, but. Just so we can get people to those routes, and it could be a van or a short bus, and I know if you had $50 million, you could probably figure it out a lot easier. I mean, is it something we can consider, and is that money still out there? It's a matter of economic development, we can't get people to live in rural areas if there's no transportation, and not everybody in Port Huron works in Port Huron. There's just a Dollar General and some pizza places in Stewart, so. But with that, if someone from Birches wants to go to Stewart's to pick up milk, 3 hours, every 3 hours to, yeah, so other sources of funding to maybe create these.
Other sources of funding to create enhanced service.
Yes.
Local loops is certainly within the realm of possibility. And the challenges that we face are drivers and vehicles. They're not insurmountable challenges. Especially as we get our legs under us with new routes. I think it might become much more feasible to consider local loop buses. There's other locations as well, that Pine Hill, for example, has raised the price of a loop bus as well.
Can I put another comment in?
Please.
With the holidays coming up, there's people who want to do the holiday shopping, and because of there's no hourly bus route or hour and a half bus route. A lot of people who want to do their holiday shopping can't access the stores, who don't have a vehicle or just don't want to use up gas or take an Uber. And I work retail, and being a retail worker, I see the influx of people who come in on the buses even to do like shopping returns, or they just want to get the shopping. And being basically a retail essential, I'd like to see my customers happy rather than complaining about how they can't get onto a bus hourly to do their shopping and then get home within a reasonable amount of time. Is there any way you guys are going to adjust like the buses for holiday shopping, for like anybody to get out there before Christmas starts impacting or Black Friday?
Where sorry, I didn't totally follow. Are you talking about shopping in Kingston or where specifically?
Kingston, like the big mall loop.
So Kingston to the mall loop,
Yeah.
enhanced this during the holidays. It's something to consider.
Because I feel like you would get,
Whenever we do an enhancement on any existing service, the next question is, where do we take that from? So if we provide additional service in one location, the next question is, where are we going to take that service from to provide the additional service? But it's something, I don't know, has UCAT ever considered enhanced service during the holidays? Tony? But thank you.
Interesting idea, thank you.
Connected question, how does so for like the Hooli on the Hudson, the big generators, the big tourism generators, you'll see all the buses running, and we have seen some clues that it takes away from through the week. There'll be buses were getting canceled before I think it was the Hooli, and then everybody gets the overtime on the weekend to work these event buses. So we've got this conflict of the buses that are like for the tourism and then the regular buses. It takes away the driver's availability. So, I mean, and the nature bus is also kind of like that. There isn't a lot of, it's not doing double duty when it really should. People from Woodstock couldn't get on the nature bus. You had to get to 28 just from Kingston to, the skiing bus, like, so the impact of those shuttle buses for events. How can we
I mean, most of
reckon with
the,
that?
thank you, most of those events are held on the weekends.
Right, they don't
Right.
take away from any weekend service, so we would.
They get overtime, the bus drivers.
That's correct, but we offer weekend service, and that weekend service is covered first.
Well, when it's a holiday, the holiday is still not covered, but the event will be covered. So.
The events are
they'll be
usually
able to
on
say
weekends, and that
Yeah.
weekend bus will run our regular service before we put on a bus for.
Right, if it's
special event.
scheduled, but we're still canceling every holiday, so people who ride the bus can't go visit family and friends on holidays, but we will cover an event. And there were cancellations of buses before the events because of driver shortage. But everyone showed during the week, right, because they're only making regular pay, not the overtime pay that they make on the events.
Thank you for your comment. At this point, it's 10 to the hour. I do want to respect people's time, and we do need to prepare for our next session, but you're welcome to stay for it. Thank you very much for your time in coming out tonight and in joining us. And I want to remind you to please go to Participate Ulster to provide us with your comments either through email or through the phone. Thank you. Good night.
Right.
What happened to Bill?